After doing over 30,000 property tax protests, I've discovered a bunch of ways the property tax code is screwed up that's costing homeowners more money than they should have to pay. And in this video, I'm going to cover the top 14 issues that I think need to be corrected and my proposed solutions on what needs to be done so that you're not getting taken advantage of by the property tax system. The last 4 points in this video are going to absolutely melt your brain. It's something that virtually nobody knows anything about. And if we just fix those last 4 on this list, then you would stand to stick a lot more money in your pocket and not have to pay into such an unfair system. Let's get started. The number one issue has to deal with exemptions. And right now, the homestead exemption in Texas allows for a maximum increase of 10% gain per year on the taxable value of your home. Every year, your taxable value can go up a maximum of 10%. That sounds okay until you enter a time like we're in right now where you've got year after year after year after year of double-digit price appreciation. Home values are climbing like crazy, and I believe that when they designed this homestead exemption, they did not imagine that we would be in a time like we're in right now where we're seeing house values go up so much every year. It's causing people's tax bills to go up like crazy, and it's not sustainable because it's a compounding number, and our wages, our income isn't increasing at the same rate. So that causes a cash flow issue, and that's at the crux of the whole matter here. If your ability to pay doesn't increase at the same rate as your bills, then you're going to have a problem. This fixes it. We should reduce the maximum increase per year. We should reduce it down to a max of 5% per year, and that would solve a lot of problems. Also, I believe that we should have an additional exemption for all single-family residential property. I could go on and on about why, but let's just imagine one scenario, and then I'm going to give you a fundamental problem of our system, why we need this. I'll give you 2 problems. All right, so three points. Here we go. The first point is we have people that could not afford to sell their property because it costs money to sell property. You have fees, realtor commissions, title policy, property tax. You have all sorts of costs that goes into selling your property. And then you have to turn around and buy another property most of the time. And sometimes people just can't afford to sell. So they have to move into an apartment, okay? And if that's the situation, then they have to rent out their house to somebody, and then they lose their homestead exemption. And if you don't have enough money to sell your house, then now you're in a situation where you can't cap the amount of growth per year on your property taxes. Then it becomes an unsustainable situation. Foreclosures happen. It causes economic problems, and real people get forced out of their homes and into bad situations. All right, so that's the first point. The second point is we have a fundamental problem in the property tax protest system where residential people have a significant disadvantage in protesting versus the commercial property owners. So right now, residential properties, all the property sales, whenever a property sells, the sale is recorded in the multiple listing system. It's the MLS. All the realtors have access to it. All the appraisers have access to it. And guess what? The appraisal districts can get access to that. If they just pay the board of realtors a little fee, then they can get access to all that data. I personally don't have a problem with them getting access to that data because I appreciate good, accurate numbers, and there is an abundance of data that the appraisal district can get access to if they get access to the MLS. Now, on the commercial side, they don't have an MLS quite like they do on the residential side. So they don't have documentation to support values. So when a commercial property owner goes in to protest their property value, the appraisal district loses. The property owner wins. And what ends up happening is these commercial properties are not getting taxed at the same level that they should be getting taxed at. So that burden on the commercial side, it gets shifted to the residential side. The residential people pay more because the commercial people are getting away with murder. Millions upon millions of dollars that are not being valued correctly. Now that what tax revenue would be generated on the commercial side now gets put on the shoulders of the residential folks. The valuation method that commercial people use is they go to their home computer, they print off a rent roll off of Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel, and they bring that documentation in to substantiate their value. Or they'll sue the appraisal district because there was a law passed not too long ago that said that commercial properties could sue based on an unequal basis. Okay, it's mumbo jumbo, but what all you need to know is it's unfair. Residential's paying too much, commercial's not paying enough, and this problem solves it. The third point on this, and then we'll move on, is that sometimes the appraisal district makes an error and they will forget to revalue the property multiple years in a row. I've seen it a bunch of times where a property's property tax value, it stays the same for like 5 years in a row. And then all of a sudden, 1 year, the appraisal district wakes up and they decide, oh, we need to revalue this property, and then the property value more than doubles. Well, it's not fair to saddle the homeowner with that error that the appraisal district had. When you talk to the appraisal district, they say, well, it's the homeowner's benefit that they didn't get their value increased for 5 years in a row, and they're just going to have to put up with it on year 6 when we decide to now revalue the property and the property value doubles. That isn't right. That would be illegal in any other industry. It should be illegal in property tax land. This problem solves it. Let's move on to number 2. Number 2, improve accessibility to free help. In the last legislative session, Representative Matt Krause reached out to our office just like he did this year and said, hey, I know you guys have done so many protests. We've done over 30,000 property tax protests. You guys know the system. You're passionate about the change. What laws do we need to pass? And he got a law passed that, well, he proposed a law that required the appraisal districts to maintain a list of professionals like me that are willing to help homeowners for free. It gives property owners access to free help. And it's a huge, huge win for Mr. Krause. Unfortunately, in the process of getting that bill passed, one word was changed from shall to may. So the way it was proposed, he proposed for the appraisal districts to be required to maintain a list of people that are willing to help for free. And then the law got changed from a shall to a may. So now they may maintain a list of free help. And I just think the larger counties should be required to maintain a list for free help because the homeowners need it. And so this idea would solve that problem. Number 3. My number 3 says to define permissible grounds to recall a CAD board member. What this means is that if you don't like how your appraisal district is being run, then we've got to look to who's responsible at the appraisal district. Most people would look at the chief appraiser and think the chief appraiser is responsible for everything that goes on at the appraisal district, and you're almost right. There's somebody above the chief appraiser. It's the folks that hire the chief appraiser and the folks that pass the budget. If you control the budget, you control everything. If you control who the CEO is, then you control everything. And the chief appraiser is effectively the CEO. And those people are the board of directors. And the voting process and how seats are filled with the board of directors makes all the difference in the world in making sure that a fair, impartial, transparent system has been conducted to get people on the board that are not colluding with the appraisal district. And so here's what we've got. Number 3 says to define grounds to recall a board member. In Tarrant County, there were 2 board members that voluntarily asked to be recalled. What they did is they took advantage of a loophole in the property tax system that allowed them to ask to be recalled, which is unheard of. I don't believe it's happened once since 1985 when this law was passed. And they did not have to state a reason why they were being recalled. Usually if you have to screw up to be recalled, but they voluntarily asked to be recalled, and I'm smelling something dirty and shenanigans here. The reason why it matters is because the process to fill a seat, if somebody's recalled, is a completely different process to fill a seat if someone resigns. And so when you're filling those seats using a process that is subject to shenanigans, then it's not cool. It's not fair. I don't like it. I want the process to fill those seats to be buttoned up and fair and transparent, because I want the people on the board there to be the best possible people that, that we have some kind of control, or at least transparency and seeing a fair system to get those people on the board. So if we had to specify the grounds to recall someone, it would close that loophole. This thing needs to be changed. Let's move on to the next point. Before I explain number 4, I want to tell you a little bit about how the whole system works. The appraisal districts are hired to work on behalf of the school districts and the cities and the county to value all the property so that property tax revenue can be generated and funneled right back to the school districts and cities and county and that sort of thing. Okay, so in order to do this job for the tax entities, the appraisal district needs to communicate with the tax entities. Well, that becomes impossible if the appraisal district doesn't have a good contact list. This is a very simple logistical issue that causes big problems. Okay. The other thing is that the taxing entities are responsible for voting to elect the board of directors at the appraisal district. And so if the appraisal district cannot communicate with these tax entities, then there cannot be a fair voting system to elect the board of directors. We have to have good contact information at the appraisal district for this whole system to be fair. So right now, the cities and counties, school district, they're supposed to report data once a year to a county website, and all we have to do is require them to update their contact list once a year to make sure that the voting system to elect the board of directors is fair and transparent and functional. And this one item would solve the whole problem. It's a simple fix, and let's move on to the next one. This next problem does not affect many people, but when it affects somebody, it is devastating. It's this: over 65 people have an over 65 exemption on their property. They can file to actually defer payment of their property taxes until after they die. It's a great, it sounds unbelievable to me, but it's true. It's a great little mechanism that is in place for senior citizens. I love it. The only thing that I don't love is this. If the homeowner has a mortgage on the property, then they have to get the lender on that mortgage to agree to allow the homeowner to defer those property taxes. Now, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for the lender, nor I'm not asking you to have a lot of sympathy, but we do have to think about what's fair. And you have to think about that lender is absolutely probably going to care whether or not the property taxes on a property that they're loaning hundreds of thousands of dollars on, if the property taxes are getting paid or not. Okay. If the lender is nice enough to allow the homeowner to defer those property taxes, that's great. The problem comes in if that lender sells the mortgage to another lender. The homeowner has no control over if that mortgage is sold. So let's just say, for example, if the homeowner buys a house using Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo says, yes, I will allow the homeowner to defer their property taxes. Bravo to Wells Fargo for doing that. But then if Wells Fargo sells that loan to, I don't know, Deutsche Bank or Bank of America or something like that, then if Deutsche Bank does not allow that deferral, then the homeowner's going to get a nice surprise in the mail someday from Deutsche telling them that they are no longer allowed to defer their property taxes, and then all those property taxes become due, and it creates a major problem. It can force somebody out of their home. They'll lose their home to the government, basically, and I don't think that's right. So here are my solutions. Number one, I think that even though this doesn't sound kind, I think it's the kindest thing we could do is, number one, prohibit the homeowner from getting a tax deferral if they have a mortgage. Because I don't think it's right for the government to impose a rule on a lender saying you must agree to this tax deferral situation, because I think that it kind of goes against the interests of that lender. I don't know if that's right to do. The next thing is to create a next proposed solution would be to create a truth in deferral statement that clearly discloses the danger of getting a tax deferral if the homeowner has a mortgage. I don't think that that's going to do it. I think that most people would whenever they buy a house or get a loan, a lot of people unfortunately don't read a word that's on the paper and they just sign stuff, and people act in their own self-interest for their immediate future. And if you can avoid having to pay property taxes right now, then most people are just jump for joy and sign the paper without thinking about what potential consequences would come, and they might not even read what's on the paper. So I'm not real excited about that option, but it's an option better than what happens now. C would be to prohibit a lender from revoking a tax deferral if it was approved by a previous lender. Again, that's the one I don't know. I'm not real excited about giving the government that much control. Okay, that's just me being honest about how I feel about things. I want to protect the homeowner more than anything, but I think that there's got to be a better way to do it. Prohibit the tax assessor from foreclosing if the homeowner of the property was previously granted deferral. I kind of like this one because I'm like, let's give the government less power and let's prohibit the tax assessors from foreclosing if the homeowner was granted a deferral. The problem is that you're still kind of like not taking into consideration the lender's position in this. I think the lender's still going to want those property taxes to be paid, but and then also you've got tax revenue that needs to be generated, and if you've got people that aren't paying their property taxes, that means somebody else is having to foot the bill. I don't know if it really. I think I would be pretty open to D on this. Anyway, I just am bringing up the problem, explaining the severity of the situation, and here's 4 potential options. I'm in favor of any kind of improvement because something needs to be done. Let's move on. Next is a problem with the terminology that the appraisal districts use. Right now, every appraisal district uses different words to describe the same exact number, and that creates massive confusion. I can give you an example for what happens in Tarrant County here. You've got 2 words, market value and appraised value. In the real world, appraised value means the value that an appraiser came up with. That makes sense. In property tax world, that's not what it means in Tarrant County. In another county, it's completely different. Just in Tarrant County, the word appraised value really would be better termed homestead capped value, because that's what it is. It is the homestead capped value and nothing else. It has nothing to do with the appraisal. The only time where the appraised value comes into play is if the homeowner has a homestead exemption and the amount of increase is being capped out at a certain level that's lower than the actual market value of the property. So then you have 2 different numbers there, and you have to come up with a name for the number. Well, I believe in naming it accurately so people can understand what's going on. Instead, they misname it. It creates massive confusion. 90% of the phone calls I get into my office about people red hot mad about their property taxes result because that number is mislabeled. It's crazy. It's madness. The appraisal district has to deal with they're spending millions of dollars literally to answer questions resulting from confusion because they have the wrong word for the number. It's madness. A simple law to clean this up would be great. Unfortunately, the last legislative session, Matt Krause was like, I'm going to go pass a bill for this. Let's send it to the legislative council. Let's get the bill drafted. Well, the legislative council came back and said, guys, hate to tell you this, but there is no way that this bill would ever get passed, because in order to go through the entire property tax code and strike through every time it says this word and write in the appropriate word that accurately describes the number, then the stack of papers that would have to be presented would be a stack larger than the entire state budget, all of it put together, and it would be just a monumental effort. Nobody's going to pass it, so we've got to go down a different path, and that's the reason why these kind of government problems exist, is because of this craziness. All right, so my suggestion would be just to add 1 additional line in the property tax code that gives property appraisal districts the ability to change terminology on their public-facing documents that say, like their website and any disclosures they send out to the client, to match up with the real world definitions and real world terminology that people, the common understanding of words. And I doubt that this goes anywhere. It's madness. I would love to see this change, but it's likely not. It's still going to make my list every time I have a gripe of how the process can be improved or an opportunity to change things. This is usually my number one thing. But that's it. Let's move on. Lucky number 7, eliminate loopholes in CAD Board of Directors voting system. So the appraisal district is in charge of their own election. I understand why, but it stinks to high heaven, and it shouldn't be that way because of the importance and magnitude of the job that they're doing. It must be a fair, impartial, transparent system to elect the board of directors at the appraisal district, because they're in control of so much stuff that affects me and you in our daily lives. They're in charge of their own election. And it's just, I've exposed what I believe to be corruption here locally, and it's really black and white. You can go find other videos where I go in detail about it. But let me just explain in a nutshell. You remember eBay a long time ago, where you basically, in order to win an eBay auction, all you had to do was watch the auction, wait until 2 seconds before the auction ended, and you could see the minimum bid. And then all you have to do is go in and bid a little bit more than the minimum, and then you would win the auction, right? Well, eBay figured out that this was a problem. People were gaming the system and getting an unfair advantage, and so they changed the rules because it's not fair. Well, that's exactly how the board of directors are elected at the appraisal district. You have these big taxing entities that have a huge voting block, and they have meetings every single week. So all they do is they wait till all the small taxing entities place their votes, and then once all the votes are tallied, they call the appraisal district, get the tally of the votes, then they collude with each other. My word, collude. It's not illegal. I just think it should be. And then they decide who they want on the appraisal district board of directors, and then they decide and basically just pick the people. It's screwed up. It's messed up. I just want to say bad words right now, but that's what happens. To fix this system, all we have to do is require the larger taxing entities to vote early in the voting window, because the voting window is like 2 months long. Large taxing entities meet once a week. The small taxing entities might only meet once every other month. So they're shackled on when they can vote. We just need the large ones to vote early on, and it straightens out a lot of mess. That's how you can fix this. Let's move on. Next is to create term limits for the CAD Board of Directors. I'm giving a lot of attention to the CAD Board of Directors because they have a lot of power. I believe they should have term limits. I believe that getting that passed may be an uphill battle. I think that there are ARB board members, which is a completely different role. They have term limits, but I don't think they should. I think that the ARB board members, it's the 3-person panel, kind of like the jury. They're being forced out of their position because there are term limits. Well, we need more of those people that know what they're doing, that have proper oversight and accountability. We need them to keep their job. That's not even on my list. But the board of directors that control the whole system, that's more of a political role. That they need term limits. I think that should be enacted. I kind of am in favor of term limits in general for any position anywhere, but I doubt it gets passed. Let's move on. Next is to make it easier for notices to be sent electronically. Because we are in the year 2021 and it just makes sense to operate like the rest of the world operates, but now we're still forced to receive all the notices via certified mail. And I want to give you an example of why this is absolute just ridiculousness, okay? It's the appraisal district actively monitors homeowners to try to determine when they move out of their house. One way they do this is by just being aware of which mail is returned as undeliverable. So if the appraisal district mails a notice to a homeowner The mail bounces back, USPS mail bounces back to them, then they'll flag their system and say, hey, I think that the homeowner is no longer living in this property, therefore we might need to cancel their homestead exemption. So then they will send a certified letter to the homeowner to the address that they already know is bad to let them know we're not going to honor your homestead exemption anymore. And then that gets bounced back, but they've satisfied the legal requirement of sending the certified mail, and then they just yank the homestead exemption off the property, and then the homeowner has to fight to get it back on. It's messed up, it's screwed up, and especially if, let's just imagine if a service member, somebody in our armed forces gets deployed and now they're forwarding mail somewhere else, they don't have time to respond to something, and it would just make life a whole lot easier if we could have an email address on file, opt to receive our notices via email, and then get notice that way. It would solve a lot of problems. Pretty common sense. Right now, if a homeowner notices that the appraisal district has made an error, the homeowner can go back and sue the appraisal district and go back 2 years to correct any issues. I like that okay. What I don't like is that if the appraisal district notices that they made an error, they can go back 5 years and correct whatever they want over the past 5 years. I'm also okay with that too. I'm just not okay with the appraisal district being able to go back 5 years, but the homeowner only being able to go back 2 years. We need that to get evened up here. The appraisal district has enough of an advantage already. They do have a logistical nightmare that they have to work through on appraising all this property. Probably be better if we could simplify the whole system somehow altogether. But barring a fundamental, overhaul of the whole thing, we need to at least make sure that it's a fair system where the appraisal district doesn't have an advantage over homeowners. This would be one step in the right direction. In the beginning of this video, I gave you a little teaser. I said in the last 4 points of this document, I'm going to reveal something that very few people know about, and this issue affects just about everybody. It causes homeowners to have to pay way more in property tax and cause their property to get misvalued significantly. It's an across-the-board issue. Homeowners hate it and appraisal districts hate it. And it seems like we should be able to clear this little mess up and solve a problem that would have significant improvements in the whole system. I'm going to dive into this. I'm going to explain what it's all about. It's concerning the ratio value study, the property value study, and it's basically what it is it's an audit that the comptroller of the state of Texas does to make sure that the appraisal districts are valuing property accurately. But it has unintended consequences and the process is screwed up. Let me dive in and explain exactly how we could clear this mess up. So I'm in favor of an audit. I just don't like an unfair audit that incentivizes the appraisal district to jack up values unfairly. So number 11 here is to concentrate on the window of sales. Here's just the tip of the iceberg and the madness it's involved in this audit. The comptroller contacts the appraisal district and says, hey guys, in January, I need you to provide numbers to me of what your appraisals are for what all the properties in your jurisdiction, what the total value of all of them are as of July. All right. Okay, wait a second. So in January, you want me to tell you what the properties are going to be worth in July? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all because they have no idea what they're going to be in July because you've got several months of sales that are going to occur. The market could change. You could have a COVID or a 9/11 or some kind of catastrophic issue. You could have plants that close, employers move town, employers come to town. And so for the appraisal district to look at where the numbers might be months in advance, if we're in an increasing, appreciating market, what that incentivizes the appraisal district to do, actually requires them to do, is to forecast what they think the values will be, and they would rather shoot high than shoot low. So they'll forecast numbers artificially inflate values beyond what the data shows that they should be at, and it's wrong, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't happen that way. All we have to do is have the comptroller say, "Hey, give me the values in January to tell me what the values are in January." Just stick with factual data instead of speculation. Don't inflate beyond what they actually are, and let's keep a sober mind about this. And that way, we're treating homeowners fairly. So that's number one. Let's keep going. The next item that I think would make a measurable difference is if we adjusted the margin of error tolerance that the comptroller gives to the appraisal district. So right now, like I mentioned, the appraisal district has to submit numbers in January for what they're going to project values are going to be in July. And they've kind of got a bullseye, and they're going to try and hit the bullseye. But if they don't quite hit the bullseye, they're allowed to be high 5% or low by 5%. I think that we should increase the amount that they can be low and still pass the audit. So instead of them just being limited to being low by 5% and passing, I think that they should be allowed to be low by 10% and pass. What that does is that removes their incentive to artificially inflate values quite so much. If the appraisal district comes in low and the comptroller says, "I'm sorry, you did not hit the mark. We think our number is here and your number is here," well, then they can still pass as long as they're within 10% of the comptroller's number, and that would help level the playing field quite a bit, because the appraisal district doesn't come out and look at any property. They all their mathematical formulas for how they determine your property value is done by a guy sitting behind a desk or operating a formula, and it's just not fair if the appraisal district isn't coming out and doing an inspection and doing an actual appraisal on every single property. Then we need to allow them to be a little bit low, because we've got to give homeowners the benefit of the doubt. I promise you, my house isn't worth what they think it's worth if I tried to sell it. In fact, if they think that they could, that I could go out and sell my property for what they're presenting it to, I'd be happy to sell it to them. Anyway, there you go. Let's move on. The next one is huge. Oh my gosh, if we did this one thing, this would be a big, big win. It's something called the alternative sales test. There are plenty of people that I come across all the time that say, "You know what? I bought my house 20 years ago for $60,000, and now my house is worth $300,000 because all these people are coming in from out of state, buying all the property in my subdivision, they're fixing it up, and they're reselling it for these astronomical numbers, and it's nothing that anybody can afford. And I made a responsible decision when I bought my house for $60,000. I could afford that amount. But now, because all the properties around me have been bought, fixed up, and sold, now the appraisal district is trying to say my house is worth $300,000, and that's crazy. I bought it for $60,000, and I have no desire to sell my house, and it's not worth $300,000 to me because I only bought it for $60,000. I'm never going to sell it, and so I should be taxed at $60,000. Well, I get that, and I kind of agree. It's not fair, and you know what's really kind of crazy? The appraisal district actually kind of agrees with you, or some people at the appraisal district does. But here's why they are going to take your property and value it for $300,000. It's because there's something called an alternative sales test. The comptroller's audit requires them to keep the properties that should be valued at like $600,000 or $60,000. They require those properties to be within 3% of the houses that have sold for $300,000. There's an actual point in their audit that only allows them to be less than the properties that have resold recently by 3%. It's crazy. Everybody knows that if somebody's owned their house for a long time and they're not planning on reselling it, that it's not going to be updated as much. It's not going to be prettied up. It hasn't been dolled up to win a beauty contest in the open market to try and attract the highest and best price. Everybody knows that, but still, the appraisal district is required to value those properties on the same level as the properties that have sold recently. It's not fair. This is the whole problem with gentrification. I love it when people come to town and fix up and beautify a an area, getting crime out, that sort of thing. I mean, who doesn't want to live in a safer place? But nobody wants to be taxed out of their home. It's not fair. And when people make responsible decisions to buy affordable housing within their means, they shouldn't be forced by the government to be moved out because somebody else comes in and is rehabbing the whole subdivision. They should be able to enjoy that neighborhood and not get taxed out of it. It's wrong. It's messed up. Low-income people, elderly people are being taken advantage of, and it's an unfair situation. If we just removed the alternative sales test, it would solve a whole lot of the problems that people gripe about with gentrification, and it would be a big step in the right direction. I really hope that one gets passed. Let's move on to the last item on the whole thing. Last but not least is an item that was brought to my attention by a guy named Andy Hopper. He ran for state senate here in District, I think 31. It's one of these rural areas. And so he has a lot of neighbors, and he owns a little farm, and they all own a little bit of land out there. And so he's in tune with an issue that causes rural property owners to basically get taxed out of their home. It's another kind, it's almost like gentrification issue, it's just in the rural version. So here's what happens. If somebody wants to buy land in the country and put cows on it, run a farm or whatever, then they should be eligible to get an agricultural exemption, which they are. They are eligible for that. However, after you buy property in rural areas, you have to pay taxes without that exemption for 5 years. You have to pay the big boy tax, and that can be unsustainable for a small farmer. But you know who it is sustainable for is a developer or somebody, a large commercial property owner that can afford to pay the higher tax bill for 5 years and wait it out. Then they end up buying up more of that land. So then what happens is the land changes hands by these big property owners that are paying top level prices instead of, and it's pricing out all the local homeowners that would probably buy them at more competitive prices. There's some theory on is exactly what would happen if this law was changed. All I know is I'm in favor of protecting the small, the individual property owner and preserving their right to be able to get the agricultural exemption. If they're using the land as farmland, as ag land, then they should get that exemption within 1 year. And this is an idea that he brought to the table. I think it's great, and I would love to see that law changed. So there you have it. That's all 14 property tax code flaws and solutions and the history and information about why these are big issues. And, you know, I might be in favor of fundamentally changing our taxing base and system altogether. I don't like the idea on a moral level of the government being able to charge me tax on property I own. I believe that that's something that the government should protect and not take advantage of. I don't like the idea of the government taxing us out of our homes. There's something fundamentally unfair about that. But all I know is about, I don't know anything about other taxing systems. All I know is for the property tax system that we have right now, it's flawed, it's messed up, it's not fair, and we need to change things so that homeowners are treated right. Unfortunately, the only way to change things is through the political process. I am not here trying to stump for a politician or pledge my allegiance to a political party. I definitely have strong political beliefs, but what this is about something that's bipartisan, that affects every single person, whether you're a tenant whose landlord is increasing property or increasing your rent because their property taxes are going up, whether you're a homeowner that actually owns property yourself. It's almost a human rights, civil rights issue, because when you have to pay so much money to your to property taxes, then you don't have enough money to pay a bill. And when they're increased this much, you get taxed out of your house. It's just not fair. And we all need to have a unified voice to tell our elected officials and legislators that this is a priority, and we don't care what bill you just passed. The problem still exists, and we need this thing to get cleared up. And the only way that this is going to happen is if we understand that the solution is is a political solution, and we have to hold our elected officials accountable. And we do have to give praise to the politicians that are sticking their neck out there and doing the right thing. I have to say thank you to Matt Krause. He's reached out to my office numerous times because he cares about these issues. He's asking for my feedback, and he's actively sending bills down to his legislative council and drafting bills, and I appreciate that. And I just hope that I would love to see some Democrats get involved. I don't know why nobody's reached out, and I don't care. I really honestly hate politics. I just want people to not get taxed out of their home, and I want to see change, and anything you can do helps. And by the way, one thing you can do is to realize what causes me to be able to do this for you guys and to be able to fight this. I don't get paid a cent for doing this. The only way that I can afford to do this is because there are people just like you that have chosen to buy or sell a house through our team of expert realtors. Every single transaction that happens, we take the revenue from that and pour it right back into serving the community and helping people. And also, if you're looking for the best realtor, just Google, look at all the reviews. We've got nothing but 5-star reviews. We are an expert team that believes that you deserve expert representation to help you stick the most amount of money in your pocket, and we work tirelessly to do everything we can to deliver that service, and the reviews and results show that we've got a pretty good track record for that. So we would be honored to help you, and you can join in this fight to help be a part of the solution. And when you choose to use us, then you are part of it. And so I just want to give a shout out to our clients. Thank you so much. It's because of you that I'm able to do this. And thank you, guys. And if you need anything, have questions, comment below. Please subscribe, and have a great day. Over now.